It's been 2 weeks since Secretary of State Rex Tillerson came out and said he has never considered leaving his post. But since then, Tillerson's job may have gotten harder. The president refused to recertify the Iran deal last week. It was something both Tillerson and Defense Secretary Jim Mattis wanted him to do. The often unseen Secretary of State sat down for an interview with Jason Zengerle early last month, just days before President Trump went on a tweet storm against him. Zengerle is a contributing writer for the New York Times Magazine. He joins us now from Raleigh, North Carolina. Welcome, Jason.
Hi, how are you?
I'm well. Well, you asked Secretary Tillerson about the president's tweets. What did he tell you?
He referred to the tweets almost the way you would refer to some sort of event by in a foreign country, some action by a foreign leader. He basically admitted that he didn't get any kind of heads up that these were coming. He talked about them as sort of an unknown, something that he couldn't control. And he said that his strategy was to make his tactics and American foreign policy resilient enough, that was the word he used, to actually accommodate the president's tweets, which seemed like an unusual position for a Secretary of State to be in, formulating strategy to accommodate the president rather than cooperating with the president.
Right, yeah. I mean, you don't certainly hear that from Secretaries of State very often, this notion of changing policy, adjusting it to fit what is tweeted out.
Yeah, or making the policy with this unpredictable kind of boss in mind.
Right.
That was really interesting.
Right. Well, how does Secretary Tillerson treat his relationship with President Trump?
You know, I think when he was offered the job, he didn't know President Trump at all, and President Trump didn't know him at all. And I think that when he was getting ready for the job, he consulted various people, and one thing that he was told, by many people who had previously served in the job was that your success will hinge on your relationship with the president. So he spent a lot of his first months in the job really trying to build a relationship and trying to build a rapport with President Trump. And that was something he was actually fairly good at in his previous job when he was the CEO of ExxonMobil. He was very experienced about going around the world and developing these relationships with heads of state. He had a very good one with Vladimir Putin, with the deals that ExxonMobil did in Russia. He dealt with a lot of very challenging foreign leaders, whether it was Hugo Chavez in Venezuela. And it was something that he was very good at. And I think he thought that it was something he would be able to do quite well with President Trump. So in his early days in the job, he would be at the White House a lot. He still is at the White House a lot. And I think he was trying to develop some kind of rapport with Trump. And he was really putting all of his cards in on the table with President Trump. He sort of neglected some of the other constituencies he could have been courting in Washington that a Secretary of State traditionally reaches out to, whether it's Capitol Hill, whether it's the press, and most importantly, whether it's the actual people who work at the State Department. He kind of put all of his chips on Trump, and now that relationship is soured, he's in a little bit of a difficult position.
Do we know anything about their personal dynamic, how they interact in meetings, for instance?
They're really different. Tillerson is he's a straight arrow. He was an Eagle Scout growing up. He later served as the president of the Boy Scouts. He's an engineer by training. When I talked to him, he discussed how he and President Trump just have different thought processes. He mentioned the fact that he was an engineer. He was very methodical. He was very process oriented. He said of President Trump that he's an entrepreneur. That was the word he used. He makes spur-of-the-moment decisions. They just couldn't be more different.
Yeah.
I also think that President Trump, I was told by some people close to him that he expected to have a social relationship with Secretary Tillerson. He has that relationship with other members of his cabinet, Wilbur Ross, Steve Mnuchin, these other sort of plutocrats. And I think he thought he might have that with Tillerson, but that's really not Tillerson's style. Tillerson is very much an introvert. He's not someone who wants to spend his time, having dinner with President Trump at his hotel in Washington. On weekends, he oftentimes will go back to Texas to see his grandchildren. He'll go to Colorado to visit his parents who are in their 90s. He's not someone who necessarily wants to hang out with President Trump.
And yet this is a job that actually requires relationship building with other countries and relationships, sort of the dynamic of that with the boss, the president, is perhaps the most relationship of all as we're seeing. But let me ask you, you spoke with Foreign Service veterans and Trump advisors. What were their views of Rex Tillerson as he entered his State Department post, and have they changed since then?
Well, I think at the State Department, initially, people there were both relieved that he'd gotten the job and actually somewhat optimistic about him. You know, I don't know if you remember, but back after the election, some of the names that were being discussed as potential secretaries of state were people like John Bolton, Newt Gingrich, Rudy Giuliani. Yeah. I think that really scared people at the State Department. When Tillerson was selected, I think they viewed that as, you know, as good a choice as they were going to get. And I think they were assured by his tenure at Exxon. Exxon is a huge corporation, has 75,000 employees, more than the State Department. It essentially has its own foreign policy. And I think they thought that experience he would be able to bring with him, and he would be a ballast. He would sort of provide stability. And that is no longer the view at the State Department by among many of the people I talk to. They're very disappointed in him. They feel that he doesn't really respect the department, doesn't respect the Foreign Service. He doesn't really want their expertise, and a lot of people have very low morale there. I think at the White House, similarly, people there are frustrated with him. They don't think that he's moved fast enough to staff the State Department. They don't like the fact that he is frequently on the other side of foreign policy issues from President Trump. So he's really just quite isolated. He doesn't have the support of his employees, and he doesn't really have much support from his boss right now. Well, so given all that, and based on your conversation with him and what's played out in the weeks since, do you think we can expect a Brexit anytime soon? You know, people have been speculating about that since the summer. I mean, long before the moron comment was reported. He's still there. You know, people seem to think that he's in an untenable position, that he really can't continue in his job, that he's lost the confidence of the president, and just as importantly, people abroad, foreign leaders, don't think that he speaks for the president. And that's a pretty impossible situation for a Secretary of State to be in. That said, I don't think President Trump wants to fire him right now. I mean, there's only so much turnover an administration can take. One administration official I talked to said that, losing your chief of staff in the first year is one thing, losing your Secretary of State is another thing. So I think that he won't necessarily be fired tomorrow, but I don't think it would shock anyone if, say, 2 months from now, he made a somewhat graceful exit. Right, because you have to think that in world capitals, leaders must be wondering who exactly speaks for the United States if, in fact, you have these very public displays of disagreement between the president and his Secretary of State. All right, Jason Zengerle, fascinating. Thank you so much. Thank you.